All right, I got to videotape this for my kiddos at home. Is that going to work? I think that'll work. Okay. All right, guys, so you can always tell how important someone is by, you know, how long the bio is for the most part, right? And this one's pretty long. So tell me something from Samuel Clemens' bio that you found to be interesting. Let's see. Mary Osborne.
He had to quit school.
Yeah, he quit school at, was it 12? I think it was 12, huh? And you know, it reminds me, well, someone last hour said, dang, you know, he's so intelligent and he quit school at 12. And I reminded them that Ben Franklin, who's probably one of the absolute smartest Americans ever, had to quit school around 10 or 11 too. So education was not, you know, it wasn't a right given to everyone. I mean, that's actually a pretty new thing. That's like a 20th century thing where everybody not only was able to go to school, but you were kind of forced to, right? Like, you guys don't have a lot of choice, okay? Even though this year's been a little bit strange. So, yeah, I mean, he accomplishes a lot. He has to leave school when his father passes away. And I'll tell you what else. He wrote a lot of books, and another one of his protagonists was a kid named Tom Sawyer, and you have all heard the name Tom Sawyer, haven't you? And Tom Sawyer was, you know, a kid who was smart and a little bit manipulative, very mischievous, and his best friend was the protagonist of this book. So, The Adventures of Tom Sawyer came out, and then years later, he follows with The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, okay? What we're going to find out is that Tom Sawyer and Huck Finn, even though they're very, very close, they're quite different from each other, especially when you look at what they have had and how they have grown up, okay? Now, either way, people speculate that Mark Twain or you know, Samuel Clemens, that's the name he was born with, people speculate that he wrote so much about childhood and the adventures that especially young boys could have because his boyhood was cut short. You know, it's kind of like he writes about the adventures that he wishes he could have had he not had to go to work so young. I always thought that was kind of interesting. All right, give me something else. Elizabeth. Yeah, so here's the thing. Samuel Clemens, very adventurous guy, right? I mean, he was an interesting fella. He tried a lot of different things in his life. He even went out west and panned for gold. That's where he also started writing. His first short stories were about the Wild West. But his favorite occupation, his favorite job, was piloting a steamboat along the Mississippi River, okay? And he probably would have kept that job except the Civil War broke out, which, if you think about it, shut down the transportation between the North and the South, right? And so, you know, you didn't have people on the steamboats going up and down the Mississippi River during the war. So he is not able to continue that. But Mark Twain, which becomes his pseudonym, his pen name, is it's a term used along the river. And if you think about it, Twain means two. So if they were on a steamboat and you were thinking that you might run aground, right? Like the water might not be deep enough for you to pass through, you would have to measure. And if you took the measurement and it was at least 2 fathoms deep, they would call out Mark Twain really loud, and that would let the pilot know that he could continue, okay? So his name is actually a term or a call used back in the steamboating days. Probably the more interesting thing about his steamboat days is that he spent years traveling up and down the Mississippi, and he took all of that in. He absorbed all that he saw, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and he transfers that into his writing. Jot this down really big at the top. I want everybody to remember this. He is a realist. He is a writer of realism, Now, I know it's somewhere typed up on that sheet, but I want you to also write it in your own handwriting, okay, so it sticks. He is writing realism. Now, guys, when you write realism, you write what you see, okay? You don't try to make it prettier than it was. You don't try to make it uglier than it was. You write what you really saw, real life. And y'all, real life in the South, especially pre-Civil War South, could be brutal, okay? So what we have here is, on the surface, a children's story where you've got this kid who's like 12 or 13, we're never told exactly how old he is, who is going to have all of these adventures. Some are just fun, some are dangerous, but they all put him in situations where he can observe society, okay? Now, if you read it on a surface level, which you could, I read it when I was a little kid and had no idea what the heck I was reading other than the, simple adventure stories that it told. I mean, it's just a fun read. But what you have to keep in mind is that Mark Twain, he is a critic of society. And he's going to write about what he really saw, especially along the Mississippi in the Deep South, okay? Now, jot this down as well, so it's, again, in your handwriting, and you don't forget, this book is published in 1884, okay? Now, it takes him 10 years to finish it, so it was started quite a bit earlier, okay? But it was published in 1884. It is set in the 1840s. Okay, so it's written, published 1880s, set 1840s. Well, what major event separates those two? Civil War. Okay, he very purposefully sets his book pre-Civil War. Okay, and we have Huck, who is going to run away, and on his adventure, he meets up with a runaway slave named Jim, and they are going to travel together and not just build a friendship, but become almost like family. Jim becomes like a father figure to him, okay? And Twain uses that pre-Civil War society and critiques that pre-Civil War society, but he's also commenting on what's happening, especially in the South, in the 1880s. Because even though the Civil War ended slavery, it did not end racism. Okay? And you've heard of the Reconstruction, right? So Reconstruction in the South was just, it was just brutal. For all parties involved, it was brutal, right? And so he is, writing a book of realism about the South. It's set pre-Civil War, but the underlying message is the critique of what is going on, not just at the time the book is set, but during the time that the book was written, okay? The other little sweet thing that you need to remember is that Mark Twain writes satire. Now, you know what satire is, yes? If not, jot this down too. Satire is the use of humor to highlight problems in society. It's the use of humor to highlight problems in society. So through things that are funny on one level, he shows us what is hurtful, harmful, and cruel on another. Okay? Now, the other thing I want y'all to know, and this is one of those books that you really have to be mindful of how you approach it, okay? And as a teacher, I want to be very careful in how I introduce it, because this book has always been wrapped in controversy. I mean, always. When it was first published, libraries banned the book because it's told from the perspective of a kid who has run away. And he comes across some things that are dangerous and ugly, but he also has some adventures that are kind of fun too. And people, adults at the time, thought that kids that read the book would be encouraged to also run off and have their own adventures, right? So that's not a good thing if you're an adult worried about what your kids are reading, okay, back in the 1880s. The other reason it was controversial when it came out is because you got a white boy and a black adult male who become not just friends but family. And that would have been a relationship that would have been questioned back in the 1880s when this book came out, right? That would have made people really uncomfortable. Well, now, 140 years later, if I did my math right, we have a controversy surrounding the language of the book because as a writer of realism, Mark Twain uses the language of the day, which is really uncomfortable for us to read, okay? So I want to make sure that as you read and you come across this language, I know it's like we're reading from like a 21st century perspective and it bothers us so much, but I think Twain wants us to be bothered because he wants us to think about really important issues that sometimes we shy away from. Does that make sense? So just kind of, remember that the overall, when we get to the end, the overall purpose is going to be, I think, or the overall message is going to be a good one, okay? So the irony of the book, or one of the ironies of the book, is that we have Huck Finn, a kid, we've got Jim, who's a runaway slave, and they find themselves on the Mississippi River having to float deeper and deeper into the South, which, if you're a runaway slave, which direction are you headed? You're going to want to go north, right? Except circumstances didn't allow that. So they find themselves going deeper and deeper into the South. And as they travel further and further into the South, the uglier things become on the shore, okay? So this is on the one surface, it's a kid's adventure story, but beneath, you have all these layers of criticism that are placed in there about that time period. Okay, go to chapter 1, first page, chapter 1, and then back up a page. I need y'all to find where it has a notice from the author. What did I do with my book? Here it is. Okay. So go to chapter 1, and then maybe the page before chapter 1, it should say notice. Now, mine is illustrated because one of my students several years ago gave me this book, and it was really beautiful, and then it got the duct tape treatment because it was falling apart, right? But mine is illustrated, this notice, kind of like it would have been, well, this is actually the original illustration that was in the first edition. Okay, so you got this picture of Mark Twain, who looks a bit like Colonel Sanders, okay? And it says, notice, persons attempting to find a motive in this narrative will be prosecuted. Persons attempting to find a moral in it will be banished. Persons attempting to find a plot will be shot by order of the author. All right, not really. We're not, we're not jeopardizing our lives by reading this, but this is an author who isn't afraid to poke fun at himself. And you know what? I've always thought that people who take themselves too seriously aren't very much fun to be around. Yeah.
What did you just say? Is that considered parallelism?
Yes, it is. Very nice. It's also written in parallel style. Good job. Good job. Okay. So go on to chapter 1. We're going to have a lot of dialect in this, which means being a writer of realism, he's going to mimic the style of how It's going to mimic the style of how people spoke, okay? And it begins like this. You don't know about me without you've read a book by the name of The Adventures of Tom Sawyer. But that ain't no matter. That book was made by Mr. Mark Twain, and he told the truth mainly. There were things that he stretched, but mainly he told the truth. That is nothing. I never seen anybody but lied one time or another without it was Aunt Polly or the widow or maybe Mary. Aunt Polly, Tom's Aunt Polly, she is, and Mary and the widow Douglas is all told about in that book, which is mostly a true book with some stretchers, as I said before. Okay, so this is set up as a sequel to Tom Sawyer. Okay, that's, why he's given us some background here. But what I love about the way he opens this book is it's Huck's voice, and he's a kid, but through Huck's voice, who is he making fun of? Himself. Yeah. He's like, well, it's mostly a true book, but it had some stretchers. What are stretchers? Yeah, some exaggerations, right? Doesn't take himself too seriously. I love that. Now, the way that book winds up is this. Tom and me found the money that the robbers hid in the cave. It made us rich. We got $6,000 apiece, all gold. It was an awful sight of money when it was piled up. Well, Judge Thatcher, he took it and put it out at interest, and it fetched us $1 a day apiece all year round. More than a body could tell what to do with. Now, I'm going to pause here and mention something. You might want to jot this down, too. Huck lives outside of society. Okay, and that's going to be important. He has basically been an orphan, and he's raised himself. He lives outside of society. Well, all right, now he's rich. He's got $6,000 in the bank. It's drawing $1 a day interest, and y'all, that's a lot of money in those times, okay? So a couple of things happen as a result of having this money. One, he gets adopted. He found all this money in the first book, and in this one, there is a sweet widow that takes him in because she finds out that he's been basically living on his own, right? The other thing is, he lives outside of society. He doesn't really care about the money. Money is a societal construct. He fends for himself. He doesn't really need money. He finds what he needs and lives on the land, essentially. Okay, which I'll drop back there. Okay, y'all pick it up for him. All right, so he's outside of society. Now, guys, eyeballs up. This is very important, okay? Being an outsider, Huck looks at things in a different way. It allows him to be more objective. So he's going to look at things like religion, practices that we are even comfortable with today, and he's going to see it in a new light, and it allows us to see things in a different light too. So Twain very cleverly narrates or has a child narrate this story because there are going to be things that he points out that in some cases he doesn't understand, but in some cases he gives this kind of fresh view on that the readers might not have thought of before, and that's kind of cool. All right, now the way that book winds up is this. Tom and me, oh wait, did I already say that? I did, didn't I? The widow Douglas, she took me for her son and allowed she'd civilize me. I want to highlight all this, guys. But it was rough living in the house all the time, considering how dismal, regular, and decent the widow was in all her ways. And so when I couldn't stand it no longer, I lit out. I got into my old rags and my sugar hogshead again and was free and satisfied. So at the very beginning, it tells us that he was taken in, adopted. She tried to civilize him, and he's way uncomfortable. I had to go, had to lit out. I lit out. But Tom Sawyer, he hunted me up, said he was going to start a band of robbers, and I might join if I would go back to the widow and be respectable. So I went back. The widow, she cried over me, and she called me a poor lost lamb. She called me a lot of other names too, but she never meant no harm by it. She put me in them new clothes again, highlight this, and I couldn't do nothing but sweat and feel all cramped up. Well, then the old thing commenced again. The widow rung a bell for supper. You had to come to time. When you got to the table, you couldn't go right to eating, but you had to wait for the widow to tuck down her head and grumble a little over the victuals, though there weren't really anything the matter with them. What's he talking about when he says she tucks her head and grumbles over the food? Right. Yeah, he's baffled by that. He's never, he's not a church kid, right? And so he's like, there really wasn't anything wrong with the food. Not sure why she was having to do that. He says, everything was cooked by itself in a barrel of odds and ends, which is how he's used to eating, right? It's different. Things get mixed up and the juice kind of swaps around and things go better. So he likes all his food the way he's used to seeing it, and that's kind of all mixed up, right? He takes the food any way he can get it and is pleased to have it. So this always kind of reminds me of the KFC bowls. Have y'all Has anybody had one of those before? They look really gross, but they're probably pretty delicious. Like it's just layers of stuff. Do y'all like all your food to be separated on your plate? Y'all don't let it mingle a little bit? Yeah, nothing's getting in my sweet potatoes. But for Thanksgiving, the others can usually kind of, mishmash together. He likes his stuff all mashed together. All right, after supper, she got out her book and learned me about Moses and the bulrushers. So what book are we talking about? The Bible. Yeah, she gets the Bible out, right? I was in a sweat to find out all about him, but by and by, she let it out that Moses had been dead a considerable long time. So then I didn't care no more about him because I don't take no stock in dead people. Pretty soon I wanted to smoke and asked the widow to let me, but she wouldn't. She said it was a mean practice, it wasn't clean, and I must try not to do it anymore. That is just the way with some people. They get down on a thing when they don't know nothing about it. Here she was bothering about Moses, no kin to her, no use to anybody being gone, you see, yet finding a power of fault with me for doing a thing that had some good in it. And she took snuff too. Of course, that was all right because she done it herself. I like that last line, okay? Do y'all know what snuff is? It's like a different form of tobacco, right? I was thinking you sniffed it, but it might actually be chewing tobacco. I'm going to have to look that up. People really don't do snuff anymore. It's either the smoking or the chewing tobacco, or if you know any boys from Benton, they always have the round can marks in the back of their breeches. Lowly, you know what I'm talking about, don't you? You know what that's for? They're Skull or Copenhagen or whatever it is. My dad used to do all that stuff. All right, so what is he able to notice about the widow, who is a good person? Like, he likes her, okay? But he picks up on something. What is it? She's a hypocrite. Yeah, here he is, as a kid, giving us his perspective, but we get that he's able to see hypocrisy. So we're going to see lots of hypocrisy that's pointed out in this book, okay? All right, that's okay. She did it herself. Her sister, Miss Watson, was a tolerable, slim old maid with goggles on. So this is a skinny old woman who's got thick glasses, who has just come to live with them too. She had just come to live with her and took a set at me now with a spelling book. She worked me middling hard for about an hour, and then the widow made her ease up. I couldn't have stood it much longer. Then for an hour, it was deadly dull, and I was fidgety. Miss Watson would say, "Don't put your feet up there, Huckleberry, and don't scrunch up like that, Huckleberry. Set up straight." Pretty soon she would say, "Don't gap and stretch like that, Huckleberry. Why don't you try to behave?" Then she told me all about the bad place. What do you think the bad place is? Hell, yeah. She set in to tell them about hell, right? I said I wished I was there. She got mad then, but I didn't mean no harm. All I wanted was to go somewhere. All I wanted was a change. I weren't particular. She said I was wicked to say what I said she wouldn't say it for the whole world. She was going to live so as to go to the good place. I couldn't see no advantage going where she was, so I made up my mind I wouldn't even try for it. But I never said so, because it'd only make trouble, wouldn't do no good. I like that last line too, because here is a kid. I've called him an orphan, but the truth of the matter is, his mother is dead, and we don't ever hear like what happened to the mom other than she's gone, right? But we find out pretty soon, actually, that his father is actually alive, but there are lots and lots of issues with the dad. One, he is absent much of the time, all right? He leaves him for like months and months and months on end. But when he is there, he is a drunk, and he's a mean drunk. You got your cheerful drunks, and then you got your mean drunks, and he is of that latter group, right? So when he is around, he beats Huck. Huck is the child of abuse. And children who are abused tend to run from confrontation. So Huck is constantly going to be saying things like, I don't want to make trouble. Okay? It makes him very adaptable. All right, hang on, almost there. Now she had a start, and she went on to tell me about the good place. She said all a body would have to do there would be go around all day long with a harp and sing forever and ever. I didn't think much of it, but I never said so. I asked her if she reckoned Tom Sawyer would go there to heaven, right? And she said not. by a considerable sight. And I was glad about that because I wanted him and me to be together. So, all right, think about this. If you've never heard of the concept of heaven, and you were told that you would walk through eternity with a harp singing hymns. I mean, I'm 50 years old, and that doesn't sound fun to me, right? It would hardly sound fun to a, 12 or 13-year-old kid. Note that when Miss Watson is asked if his friend Tom Sawyer is going to go to the good place, she said, oh, no, not by a considerable sight. So she's supposed to be a Christian, but she's judging this kid, right? So there's lots of hypocrisy, and this is just kind of the start of it. The clever thing is, though, it's wrapped in humor, which is satire, okay? All right, I need y'all to read through chapter 3 tomorrow. That's about 10 pages, okay? And that'll help you get to where I want to pick up. So I've got a few things I can say about that tomorrow. But you're going to need to read through chapter 15 for when? Do y'all know? Did I tell y'all?
No.
Oh, well, maybe I'll tell you now. Tuesday, you're going to have a quiz on the first 15 chapters, but the good news is these are really short chapters, okay? And secondly, unlike the Scarlet Letter, which is so heavy, I mean, this is going to be a lot faster to read, okay? All right, I'll see y'all tomorrow. Have a good day.